Hey, folks. I suppose you've heard already, scientists at the Oregon Health and Science University in Portland took one more giant step in the Frankensteinian brave new world of science. They say they've created human eggs from skin cells and successfully fertilized 7 of the 80 eggs before killing them. Now, I reviewed several articles and treatments on this by conservative evangelical news sources, and what was surprising to me was that none of them that I found appealed to the Bible or to God. That being the case, Christians who cannot stand on the Bible are irrelevant to the discussion. They complain about the problem, and then they tell us this brings up heavy ethical and moral considerations, blah, blah, blah. But at the end, does anybody really care what God actually said? Does anybody want to bring up Deuteronomy 22:11 in the discussion? People mock at Deuteronomy 22:11. Nobody really knows what Deuteronomy 22 verse 9 and 11 said. And does anybody really think about Exodus 22 and 23 when talking about IVF? When was the last time these verses were mentioned in Christian media? Christians today who reject the authority of God as they speak to the issues, well, we all agree that the ceremonial laws that were fulfilled in Christ's sacrifice, but not the moral laws. And yes, Deuteronomy 22:5 still applies to transgenderism and the brave new world's macabre surgeries for 5-year-old kids. Now, we had a person write into theworldview.com and say, hey, don't use Deuteronomy 22:5 for arguments against transgendering and cross-dressing. It's embarrassing to use God's law when arguing a political issue or a moral issue like that. Friends, that's 95% of evangelicalism today. They're embarrassed of God and his law. And you know what? I'm embarrassed for them. Let me say this. It's way, way too late to be claiming to be a Christian, opposing their worldviews, and still refusing to uphold God's law as the ethical standard upon which to base morality and justice. So for this brave new world that we're confronting today, it's God's law or bust. It's either God's law or you are irrelevant to the conversation. And when it comes to transgenderism, IVF, artificial IVF from skin grafts, 3-parent babies, and all the rest of the brave new world craziness, if you refuse to appeal to God and his law, you have undermined your ethical authority. You have abandoned the fight entirely. We're not listening to you. Nobody's listening to you. So read Psalm 119 and ask yourself, is this me? Here it is. I will speak of your testimonies also before kings and will not be ashamed. And I will delight myself in your commandments, which I love. My hands also I will lift up to your commandments, which I love. And I will meditate on your statutes. Rivers of water run down my eyes because men do not keep your law. Adam McManus is joining me next for more conversation on this brave new science, mRNA vaccines, and more. That's next on Generations. Stay with us. Welcome back, my friends, to the Generations broadcast. Kevin Swanson, your host, with you. And joining me is Adam McManus, our host on theworldview.com. Welcome, Adam.
Thank you, sir.
Highly significant stories coming out. We're going to address the brave new science world as we come back to the sorts of things that men are doing who do not fear God. It's a big concern. A fairly high percentage of those who are active in the scientific world today are atheists, evolutionists, materialists, anti-supernaturalists, and they bear the wrong worldview. Now, I happen to believe you have the wrong worldview, you're going to wind up with wrong conclusions. That is, ideas have consequences, really bad ideas, really bad foundations upon which to build your factual content and the rest of the structure of your knowledge in science. If you have a bad worldview, if you have bad foundations, if you have bad ideas, it's going to produce bad consequences. And Adam, this is what sounds like what's happening with the Oregon story. Scientists at the Oregon Health and Science University in Portland, they've taken another giant step in the Frankensteinian brave new world of science. And what they did is they've created human eggs from skin cells, successfully fertilized 7 of the 80 eggs, and then evidently they didn't last for more than 6 or 7 days. They killed them. So it turns out that this is a new development. Now, in this case, they took the skin cells from women and removed the nucleus from each of them. The nucleus contained the 46 chromosomes that carry the 20,000 or so genes that comprise the human genetic code. Each skin cell nucleus was placed in a healthy donor egg that had its own nucleus removed. Okay, so the egg had nucleus removed. They put a skin cell nucleus into the egg, and a major challenge the scientists faced was that healthy human eggs contain only 23 chromosomes. Further 23 arrive in the sperm on fertilization are needed to fertilize the egg. Well, evidently the Oregon team described how they overcame the problem of excess chromosomes. After fertilizing the eggs with sperm, they activated them using a compound called resovitin. This caused the eggs to move roughly half of their chromosomes into a structure called a polar body, leaving the remaining chromosomes to pair up with those from the sperm. Okay, so that's what they did. They also suggest that the same thing could happen. You could draw a nucleus of another egg from the skin cell of a man. So here we have probably one of the most egregious examples of the brave new world in the science sphere that we've seen in our lifetime. Adam, sounds horrific, doesn't it? Sounds like Frankenstein showed up.
It does, and it is a striking contrast with Scripture where we read in Psalm 139:13, "For you, God, created my inmost being, and you knit me together in my mother's womb." Life originates from God's creative act. And when we try to manipulate fertility through technology and these scientific developments, we really are playing God. And I don't think that's something that we should be walking down that road. I think we're going to regret it. Job 121 itself says, "The Lord gives and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." It's not man gives and man takes away. But what's happening here, I think, is at direct odds with scriptural teaching of the origin of life and fertility being something that is in God's sovereign control.
Well, and Deuteronomy 22 also forbids playing with genetics, mixing seeds, that kind of thing. Now, I realize a lot of people can't imagine that God's law could speak to the issue of genetics, arguing from the lesser to the greater, and, applying this to, I do the same thing, by the way, with Deuteronomy 22 and verse 5, when I say cross-dressing is against God's law, it's an abomination to God. Therefore, attempting to change your body structure and form by surgery is even worse. Okay, so arguing from lesser to greater, I think we can do that using God's law. But also Exodus 22 and 23, we've brought this out a number of times. It speaks directly, I believe, to this. "You shall not afflict any widow or fatherless child. If you afflict any of them, I will surely hear their cry. My wrath will become hot, and I will kill you with the sword. Your wives shall be widows," etc. So, in other words, what he's saying here is that we're not to afflict the child, the fatherless or the motherless child. And if you're creating parentless children, orphaned children from the outset in the laboratory, that, I believe, is an even more egregious crime against the true and living God. So, again, we have multiple passages here that I think out and out forbid any of this messing around with the development of children in the genetic laboratories of Portland, Oregon, or anywhere else. And ultimately, this is the lack of the fear of God. I want to get there in just a little bit, but this is a science that doesn't fear God. I mean, this is what happens. You don't fear God for 140 years in your scientific laboratories and science programs in the universities across America. What's it going to look like? And this is what it looks like. After a while, sure enough, Victor Frankenstein showed up.
Mm-hmm. Well, Romans 1:22 through 25 speaks to the idea that sinful humanity, exchanged the truth of God for a lie when it worshipped its own creation rather than the Creator. So all of this artificial manipulation of embryos, surrogacy outside of marriage, including giving the homosexual couples the ability to have their own genetically derived children, selective abortion when there's multiple implanted embryos into a surrogate woman, all of it replaces trust in God's sovereignty with a notion of human self-sufficiency. And I think it's just another Polaroid snapshot of our sin nature writ large.
Yeah, and I want to bring out another example of this with the COVID-19 shot. We're coming back to this story. I think we need to come back to this story. And if you remember some of the belly aching that I shared with our listening audience way back in 2021, 2022, when it came to the vaccine, you probably remember that I was concerned with the lack of the fear of God in the science laboratories of Pfizer and others that were developing the COVID-19 mRNA shots. And the fact is, this shot was rushed to market right away without testing. Typically, a vaccine is qualified over 8 to 12 years of testing over a sample size of, your first 10, then you do 100, then you do 1,000. And so you do it in, as best as you can. You try to identify whether you're having any adverse conditions following the shots. And this is the sort of thing they did for, the last 50, 60 years of developing vaccines. But I think what happened with the COVID nightmare and the fear that was associated with it is you didn't have the fear of God, certainly. You had the fear of the disease, but you also had an implicit trust in science and a trust in governments and the pride of man, the pride of the scientist to present a quote-unquote solution that was supposed to be, just trust us. We know what we're doing here. Take this shot. We haven't never used the mRNA for, any sample size above, 4 rats and 2 people. But here, let's test it out on 2.6 billion people in the world and see what happens. That seems to me to be about the most irresponsible thing that any scientist or any government program has ever done in the history of mankind. I can't think of any other instance. Can you, Adam, in which you try out something on 2.6 billion people, maybe more than that?
Such intense pressure in every sector of society from the government and the controls that it had. It maximized those, threatening people with loss of job, loss of benefits, loss of ability to enroll their kids into school, loss of access to 1,000 different things that put pressure on people to get the shot. 81% of Americans got the shot. That's an incredible stat.
Incredible.
And we know, you and I both have a friend named Colonel Kevin Boren, who was just reinstated, just sworn in by War Secretary Pete Hegseth. He was let go under the Biden era because he objected to the COVID vaccine, not really on religious reasons, although he had those, but primarily on medical reasons. It would have, through his own medical history, been likely fatal if he took it. And so he refused, and it cost him his job. He is one of the first to be reinstated with his back pay, and Colonel Kevin Boren's singular job in the military today is to restore those that were dismissed under Biden, who refused to take the shot, 98% of them for religious reasons, because of the connection with aborted babies used in the production of the COVID shot, at least the first one and several others after that.
Right.
He is going to restore them, their back pay, and perhaps even their jobs if they're interested at this juncture. So that is one kind of silver lining in this dark cloud of the COVID vaccine mandates and the government overreach that really hurt a lot of people and killed a lot of people, according to this new American cover story that just came out Monday, October 6th, entitled COVID Vaccine Carnage, the Rising Death Toll. A very disturbing report.
Right. Quite an interesting report. And I think there needs to be a fair amount of study done on the results of the COVID-19 mRNA shot for part of the reason that Pfizer and other of the big pharma organizations are putting together more mRNA shots for the flu vaccine and a number of other vaccines. So for that very reason, it seems to me there needs to be a fair amount of data coming out on this. In God we trust, all else bring data. That was one of what my engineering professors would say. And I say the same thing. In God we trust, all else bring data. And the idea that somehow we're all supposed to trust government And we don't need to see the data. Nothing to see here, nothing to see here is a problem as I see it.
Right.
Now, there's a study just recently done called the 12-month all-cause mortality after initial COVID-19 vaccination in Pfizer-BioNTech or mRNA-1273 among adults living in Florida. This was co-authored by MIT professor Retzelf Levi and Florida Surgeon General Dr. Joseph Ladapo. Published in April, it dealt yet another blow to the COVID jab safety myth. According to the results, among 1.47 million vaccinated Florida adults, those who received the initial Pfizer shot faced a 37% higher risk of death within a year than those who received Moderna. So that's just
Incredible.
comparing Moderna and Pfizer. So evidently the Pfizer shot was 37% more dangerous. I don't think they have an explanation for why, but just based upon the initial data, it appeared the Pfizer shot was 37% higher of a risk of death than the Moderna shot. And if you just continue on in all this data, you find that these guys have come up with an estimate that Pfizer's shot produced 470,000 American deaths. And their final number is there was one death for every 636 Americans caused by the COVID-19 shot. And so I was thinking, okay, 1 out of 636 based upon these studies. That's 13 times more likely to be killed by a shot than an auto accident in any given year. In other words, for that year, you had a 1 in 636 possibility of dying by the shot, by the Pfizer shot. And again, that's 13 times more likely to be killed by the shot than to be killed in an auto accident in that year. And that again is, I would say, something that most people are concerned with. I mean, if I'm going to have a pretty high likelihood of dying by the shot, I should know that. I should know those odds. And that, of course, is why I argue for an 8 to 10 or to 12 year testing.
And this was rolled out in 9 months.
And granted, I think anybody has the right to step forward and say, I would like to be a subject. And I'd like to be part of the first sample size of 100 who take that shot and clear it for the use for others. But again, let's do it with 100 volunteers. Let's find 1,000 volunteers who'll take the shot first, and we'll also have another group that does not take the shot, but is effectively in the same community and has perhaps the same odds of getting the same disease as the rest of the crowd. So again, this is what is called an experiment. This is what engineers and scientists have done for a very long time, and it's something that was not done for the clearing of this COVID-19 shot.
The very name Operation Warp Speed under President Trump indicates that they were throwing caution to the wind, throwing normal regulatory practices to the wind, and rushing this to market, whether it was going to be effective or safe or not. And that's very troubling indeed. Later in this article from the New American, again entitled COVID Vaccine Carnage, the Rising Death Toll, they looked at countries where there was a surge in excess deaths following the COVID vaccine rollouts, particularly during booster campaigns in early 2022. Many of these countries had shown no excess deaths during the pandemic's first year. Let that sink in. During the pandemic's first year, when people were getting sick, having the symptoms, dealing with the challenge of COVID, there were no excess deaths. But following the vaccine rollout, especially in the booster campaigns in 2022, there were excess deaths. In fact, in 9 countries, mortality peaked precisely with 3rd and 4th dose campaigns, especially among the elderly, months after the virus had subsided. The data showed no benefit to taking the shots. Instead, the vaccines coincided with harm and applied globally. As the New American kind of looks at all of these different data points, the rates suggest that 17 million people might have died, not from COVID, but from the COVID vaccines.
And also, conceptions, pregnancies, very, very tough. The article that you're referring to in the New American also spoke of the Czech Republic rates of successful conceptions by COVID-19 vax status. Sample sized 1.3 million women. So they looked at quite a large sample size, found that pregnancy rates success reduced by a staggering 33%. For those who had the shot. In June of 2021, 39% of women were vaccinated, yet they accounted for only 7% of all successful conceptions. And then there's a whole section on how many stillbirths there were for those who actually did get pregnant, and that was yet another issue. So again, the New American has an entire series of articles on the COVID vaccine, and this would have been, 3 years after the fact.
And there was also a reference to miscarriages, which I think is important.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There was a study by Dr. Tom Shimabukuro entitled Preliminary Findings of mRNA COVID-19 Vaccine Safety in Pregnant Persons. Has to use the politically correct language, can't say pregnant women. But he goes on to say that isolating women who were vaccinated during the first trimester, their miscarriage rate jumped to 82%. 82. Clearly, that's problematic. Mm-hmm. And I don't hear many in the mainstream media touching on all of this very well-documented data. Do you? Outside the New American, which is considered kind of on the right politically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, I'm coming back to the fact, friends, that as an engineer and as a trained scientist, you've got to test this stuff out. You've got to have studies before you release these things to market. A typical length of time for qualifying a vaccine is 8 to 12 years. This is rushed to market, and I say largely because of this trust in science, this trust in government, this pride of science. Just don't pay any attention to anybody. I know what I'm doing here. Just take the vaccine. A few countries mandated a vaccine for every citizen: Austria, Greece, Italy, Indonesia, and 81% of Americans were vaccinated for the COVID-19 virus. Well, friends, let me throw in one more thing. It's trust in science, it's trust in governments, and it's also, I think, due to the anti-free market system, the socialist system that is so often imposed upon us. As we have said many times before, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Governments step in to purportedly save us. In the process, they ruin us. I mean, this is the kind of thing governments do. And to this day, governments, at least U.S. governments, we're talking mainly the federal government, perhaps some state governments, they're paying 60% of the $600 billion pharma industry in this country. Governments paid for 100% of the COVID shots. If you remember, that was about $32 billion business for the 2 to 3 years they were in operation. But this isn't free market. This is not the free market. This should be obvious. If governments are forking over 60% of the $600 billion pharma industry, that's not free market, my friends. Socialist anti-free market approach that eschews the consumer's opinions, consumer satisfaction, and the priority of producing a product or a service that benefits the consumer. The consumer doesn't matter. Why? Because governments have stepped in, and governments, all they care about is to fund and to control and to ruin the things that they touch. That's a given. Now, the Bible is very strong on government involvement in these things. Governments are not to take more than 10% of the people's income, and that's for purposes of defense and justice. So governments pretend to love us. They pretend to be demonstrating charity by taking good care of us. But you know what? They don't. It's not about love. It's about power and control. People succumb to government control of healthcare for security reasons. And I think of Samuel Adams' classic quote. This is one of the founding fathers of America from Boston. What would Samuel Adams say? If you love wealth more than liberty, the tranquility of servitude better than the animating contest of freedom, depart from us in peace. We don't ask for your counsel or your arms. May your chains rest lightly upon you, and may posterity forget that you were our countrymen. You know, it's interesting. I was also doing a study of the history of the Third Reich. And William Shirer is probably the most famous chronicler of the rise and fall of the Third Reich. I'm sure you remember William Shirer. He was the journalist on the scene for almost 12 years or 15 years of watching it. And of course, he was persecuted a good amount of time as well, but he was there during all those years as the Third Reich was getting its start. And here's what he said in his book, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. He said, way back in the 1800s, Bismarck instituted the first social security program far beyond anything known in any other country. A profound influence on the working class in that it had a profound influence on the working class in that it gradually made them value security over political freedom and caused them to see in the state, however conservative, a benefactor and a protector. In other words, Bismarck was trying to present himself as something of a conservative, but in the process, he was working very hard to see that the German people would value security over political freedom. And Adolf Hitler then wrote in Mein Kampf, he said, I studied Bismarck's socialist legislation in its intention, struggle, and success. He was very careful to study Bismarck and how he was so sure that the German people would surrender their freedom for that security and eventually see that the state would be their benefactor and protector. And that's precisely the message that Adolf Hitler tried to convey to the people during the rise of the Third Reich. So again, my friends, the idea that ultimate security is found in the state and the all-providing state that takes care of your health and wealth and everything about you from womb to tomb, my friends, that's nothing but a ruse. Ultimate security is found in the graveyard, which is precisely the point that the Third Reich and the Nazis were that proved in the history of Germany. So I would say these are the issues that we need to be most concerned about, is that there's a trust in science, but there's also this trust in government and this seeking of security from government and the turning of the free market, what should be a process of the free market, the turning of the healthcare of the people over to governments. And that sort of thing has happened almost nonstop over the last 100 years or so.
There's one other study I'd like to cite from the New American article, COVID Vaccine Carnage. In April of 2024, Kevin, the largest vaccine safety study ever conducted delivered a stunning verdict. Published in the peer-reviewed journal Vaccine, the multinational study analyzed adverse event data from more than 99 million people across 8 countries. That's a big study. This was not the work of fringe researchers or citizen journalists. It was a formal collaboration between national health agencies and academic institutions, and its findings were devastating. The study identified multiple serious neurological and cardiovascular conditions strongly associated with both the mRNA and viral vector COVID injections. For example, myocarditis, the risk of your heart being hurt, increased by 510% following the mRNA vaccine. Cerebral venous sinus thrombosis spiked 223% with viral vector shots. So the conclusion in this April 2024 largest ever vaccine safety study in the journal Vaccine was this: these are not minor or rare side effects. These are catastrophic immune and neurological breakdowns now documented at a scale in one of the most robust data sets available. That's pretty damning stuff.
You know, I don't think anybody's going to question. Now, some people could question this data. They might question the data. Now, at the very least, I'm hoping that anybody with a sense of, rational concern for the health of the nation and for the world would say a few more studies in order, please, at the very least. But now I want to leave our listening audience with this. These evolutionists and these genetic engineers and the biologists that so dominate this field today, they don't fear God. Is there any question about that? Does anybody question whether or not the vast majority of Pfizer, The vast majority of biologists, genetic engineers, and evolutionists, and by the way, biology is the field of evolution. That's where evolution tends to be most prolific and flourish more than in any other field of study. It's not like evolution is quite as active in mathematics, okay? So in these fields of biology, genetic engineering, evolution really, really dominates. And my question is, do these people fear God? And the obvious answer, of course they don't fear God. You walk in there, you go to Pfizer, go to any of these genetic engineering organizations, and you ask the people that run these organizations, you ask their scientists, do you guys fear God? And they'll tell you, of course we don't fear God. That's ridiculous. Now, Dr. Victor Frankenstein, he doesn't fear God. That's the issue. Now, I shudder to think what science will do sans the fear of God. The pride of man is unstoppable when it comes to this world of science. The Chinese are already out of control. What in the world would Chinese do with weapons of mass destruction? What would they do with biological warfare in Wuhan laboratories or anywhere else? What do you think they're doing? You really think that these scientists who don't fear God, who've got a fair amount of humanist forms of science, and they've got it out of American Western universities, and they've shipped it back into China. You really think they're going to do good stuff? Given that the university training they received doesn't fear God, given that Chinese communists don't fear God by definition, given that they're going to create a science that is based in the pride of men, based in the sinful intentions and motivations of the evil hearts of men, what do you think they're going to do with it? I shudder to think what they're doing in Wuhan laboratories. Already the Chinese are out of control. Mice with 2 male parents. They've already done this recently. Autonomous drones, killer robots, biological weaponry, AI-designed toxins, CRISPR-edited toxins. It's something beyond smallpox now. It's getting beyond anthrax, all right? We're way beyond that at this point. These people who don't fear God are like Frankenstein, and they eventually will do something that will most likely destroy the world, unless that there are Christians anywhere in the world who still retain enough salt that there's perhaps some Christian engineers, some Christian science folks, some Christian educators, homeschoolers that are teaching a science that is based in the fear of God. I cannot impress upon my listening audience enough how important it is at this point to raise our children in a science that fears God, considers the awesomeness of God, the handiwork of God, the goodness of God, the wisdom of God, the genius of God, the power of God in his creation, and expresses it on every page of the curriculum. That's what we do. We're trying to bring this back on steroids because I truly believe if we don't educate the next generation of thousands, if not tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of scientists on a science that fears God, you're going to wind up with a science that will destroy the earth, or at the very least will wind up in some cul-de-sacs that will turn out to be some of the most destructive and futile cul-de-sacs that science has ever identified. This is the way I express it in my book, Epoch, the Rise and Fall of the West. The 21st century produced children born of 3 parents, artificial insemination, surrogate wombs, millions of disposable snowflake children, human-animal hybrids, artificial wombs, and innumerable other monstrosities. The overuse of antibiotics made the world more susceptible to highly resistant superbugs. The natural was traded for the unnatural. Children conceived outside of human relationship in the institutionalized womb to tomb. There was no end to what Dr. Frankenstein would do absent of the fear of God and all biblical morality. Would proud scientists set the world up for the most spectacular failure in all of human history. That's the way I express it in my book, Epoch, the Rise and Fall of the West, my chapter, The Rise and Fall of Science. I would encourage you at least to read that chapter. The Rise and Fall of Science is probably the most crucial chapter in my book, Epoch, the Rise and Fall of the West, available at generations.org. This is Kevin Swanson and Adam McManus. We want to invite you back again next time as we continue to lay down a vision for the next generation. This has been a production of the Generations Media Network. For more information, go to generations.org/media.